So we've talked about various, codes that affect various parts of the facility and systems within the facility. And we've talked about kind of how to execute those things, what the best practice approach to various things is. And what I'd like to do now is try to bring all of these sort of individual areas of discussion together into kind of how does this integrate, what's it look like. And I've done that in a couple of different ways here, one of them graphical and one of them tabular. So the first one is the graphical one. And so this is our garage. And you can see here, I'll just go clockwise around here. So we have makeup air units uniformly arranged on exterior walls near the floor. So here's one here, here's another over here. And that's what that looks like, by the way. There's an example from yet another project. So we've got our makeup air down near the floor, and it's heated. We're exhausting at the high point on exterior walls or roof. So you can see here's an exhaust fan up here. And this would be our continuous ventilation, and that would be at a rate of 1 CFM per square foot of floor area. So that's our continuous exhaust. We compare those two boxes. Note that although the code doesn't specifically call this out, we typically, and I think most people typically, use Class 1, Division 1 or 2 rated motors for these fans. And again, the reason is because at some point in the life of that fan, it's possible that you're going to have gas release in your structure, and you're going to be pulling a combustible mixture of gas across that fan. So again, non-sparking impellers and either explosion-proof or Division 2 rated motors. It is a very common approach in the industry, and it is also our approach. So the HVAC system, it can be indirect fired, it can be, but there needs to be no open flames, and we have to have no surface hotter than 750. So again, just those requirements that we went through in NFPA 30A. So again, just to remove that ignition source. We also have supplemental exhaust, so our second fan over here is our supplemental exhaust fan. And it's triggered at 25% of the lower flammability limit, or LFL. And that will increase our ventilation rate, in this case, from 1 CFM per square foot to 5 air changes per hour. It's a bit annoying that they sort of go back and forth between these two units and these two ways of thinking about it. But if you think about it like this, 1 CFM, so that's 1 cubic foot per minute, and an area of 1 square foot. So if you have a facility that is 20 feet high, from the floor to the underside of your structure, 20 feet high, in an hour, you'll move 60 times 1, so you'll move 60 CFM in an hour. So you'll move 60 cubic feet in an hour. So if you look at that volume, if it's 20 feet high, 60 divided by 20, you've got 3 air changes in an hour. So you're moving 60 CFM in an hour, and your volume per square foot is 20 cubic feet, so you're changing the air 3 times in an hour. Similarly, if you had a 30-foot high ceiling height, then you'd be 60 divided by 30, you'd have 2 air changes in an hour. So earlier when I said that usually works out to between 2 and 3 air changes per hour, that's really what it comes down to. So that 1 CFM per square foot, if you want to convert that into air changes per hour, it depends on what your ceiling height is. The lower the ceiling height, the higher the air changes per hour. So hopefully that makes sense. But it is kind of confusing because it'd be nice if we just stick with one. So let's say, for the sake of argument, we have 2.5 air changes per hour. We'll pick the middle value. But when we bring on our supplemental, we have to add at least another 2.5 to get us up to a minimum of 5. Certainly we can go beyond that, and in many cases we do go beyond that. If the roof has pockets, and we've shown a roof structure that has pockets, you have to continuously ventilate those. So you can see we've got ducting that's poking up into each of those pockets. It's a diagram, but And the ventilation system for this room must be separate from the rest of the building. So again, we don't want to connect ventilation. We don't really even want to connect ventilation between building spaces. So for example, your maintenance garage, it's best to have a separate ventilation system from maintenance versus parking area, as an example. And the room should be at a negative pressure relative to the rest of the building. So we have talked about that previously as well, just to keep any leak that might occur from trying to migrate into another part of the building. Okay, so we're going to look at the response here. So notice our continuous ventilation is running. Our fan's turning, we've got air happening here. Oh, we got a gas release. There's our gas. It's up in the ceiling space. Now stuff starts to happen. The gas detection sees 25%. Our supplemental exhaust has switched on. Our outside door opened. Don't know whether you caught that or not. And we have audible and visible alarms. I have my computer muted right now because it's a kind of an obnoxious sound. If anybody really wants, I can turn it on. But at any rate, that gives you an idea of what that looks like. So again, when that bus came in and released, gas detection first, and then all these other things kind of happened all at once. And so that was our response. Make sense? We changed the duct color here too, so we're not, we've shut the heat off, so the duct is no longer blowing warm air. Okay? So just trying to kind of bring it together. And when you see it, I mean, it does kind of all integrate together, and it's not complicated, but there's just a few different moving pieces, and unfortunately it's very situational. You know, this is a diagram, but when you get out into the real world, every facility is going to need something just a little different than the last one. Oops. So to try to present this another way and make it easier for you to kind of pull it all together, we've put together this, there's two tables here. One of them is the requirements for the major repair garage. That's what I have up right now. The next page is for minor repair garage or vehicle storage area. And again, I combined those because there's really not a lot of requirements in the two, so we kind of mashed the two together. But as I've also said, many people do this throughout their facility. Because logically, if you could have a gas release in the maintenance area, you could just as easily have a gas release in the storage area. And in fact, it might be more likely to happen in the storage area because most people, when they pull buses in for maintenance, they don't fuel them. They pull them in half full. Whereas when you pull them into a storage area in a bus fleet, they are always full. The way these buses are serviced, the last thing you do before you park the bus for the night is you fill it. Along with removing cash and things like that. But those buses are parked full. That's standard operating procedure for every bus fleet I've ever worked with. So, okay, so we kind of divided this up. You can see the different aspects here: electrical, heating, ventilating. We got ventilation continuous, which would be your baseline. We got ventilation emergency, so that's supplemental to the baseline. And we've kind of done a good, better, best kind of approach so that you can see this is the absolute minimum that you can do here, this left column. So this is what the code says, you know, thou shalt do these things. But in many cases, industry practice is to go beyond that. Not so much in the major repair garage because the codes are fairly prescriptive in this area anyway. But as we move into the next one, you're going to see that best practice kind of moves you into more and more things that you might want to consider doing. So typical recommended practice, that's just maybe kind of the average facility. And then if you want to go for a more high-end approach, that would be your right-hand column. And why would you do that? Well, you're adding safety. You're basically, and perhaps energy efficiency with some of this too. So as you move from left to right, you're adding safety. So the criteria to move from left to right is really what is the owner's risk tolerance? Because the owner is going to have to spend the money. They may have unions that are influencing some of these decisions too, but they're going to have to spend the money and decide how much more they're willing to spend basically in the name of safety. And as I said, possibly energy efficiency. I didn't go through those, but if you have any questions on it, please feel free to contact me. Okay, so in the minor repair garage, as I mentioned, there's really not a lot of requirements. If you look here, no requirements, no requirements, no. So almost no requirements at all. And again, my argument would be, yes, I understand that that's code, but does that mean it's safe? And I would say it doesn't, because we have industry experience of incidents that happened in those other areas, that thankfully were taken care of because the owners had done more than the minimum. So you can see again, sort of good, better, best, or in this case, maybe good is the middle column. But yes, so certainly there are things you can do beyond code and that we would recommend it. And again, for consistency, many owners do the same thing throughout their facility. Any questions? So you'll see we didn't really put a lot of code references on here, not too many. The idea is we've just kind of sifted through the code and taken the things, if there's conflict between codes, we've taken the thing that would be sort of the higher level requirement and distilled it down into an easier to digest, consolidated look at the codes. So one other thing, we've been talking here about doing the entire facility, upgrading the entire facility, and that I would say is the most common approach when something like this is attempted. But there are other ways of going at this, and so Clean Energy, that's the company that sponsored water bottles there, by the way. Clean Energy is a large contractor in our industry. They actually installed the CNG station that's at this facility. You probably saw the canopy as you drove in. But they have an approach that they have also marketed, and they call it Easy Bay. And this is a rendering of it here, you can see. But essentially, the idea behind this Easy Bay is to build a sort of microclimate within your shop. And this would go into the maintenance area probably. It's got, you can see the walls, actually I'll go to the next one. So that's an actual installation, not just a rendering. But you can see here that within this space, these are just really curtain walls. And so there's no fire rating in the wall. It's just controlling the migration of the gas release. And it would be up near the ceiling space. It would have to essentially seal off that particular sort of temporary room, I guess, from the rest of the garage. And it would have to have its own HVAC system. You can see here there is a unit heater, a catalytic, let me try that again. A radiant tube heater here. I'm frankly not sure whether we're inside or outside of the space in this picture. But anyway, so there is a radiant tube heater. If it's inside, that would have to be a low temperature heater. They gave me 10 installations to date. You can see these are pretty much all cold weather installations. Some of them very cold. We got Edmonton, Alberta there. So again, the idea here is instead of having to tackle, a 20,000 square foot maintenance garage, whatever, you take maybe 2 bays out of that, and you kind of create that little microclimate around those 2 bays and protect that area in the event that you had a release. So I think I have one more picture there. So they gave me a full system price of $175,000 to $250,000. These would be applicable for CNG, LNG, or also hydrogen. So although they're primarily in CNG use right now, they would work on any of those 3 applications. The price that they've given me, there's a lot of questions around that because they didn't provide any parameters. Is that 1 bay? Is that 2 bays? Does that include gas detection? Does that include their own HVAC system? What is included in that? And I don't have the answer, but if this is something that makes sense for your fleet, I would recommend you talk to them directly, and they're going to need to come out and look at your installation and really price it up. So that being said, I do think there's, this might be a good strategy as part of your fleet growth plan, but there are some limitations to this. Many shops have sort of task-specific bays, so there's a number of things you need to do in that shop. You don't bring one vehicle always into the same bay. Depending on what you're doing, you may need to take it to a different type of lift or whatever. So unless you're going to get very large and take in a big chunk of your shop with this, then you may find that you've got some limitations of what you can actually do in that space. So if you have a small fleet, you've got 6 vehicles or something, and you want to have some limited ability to do some work in there, this might be a good way to kind of bridge the period where you're experimenting with the fuel, you're getting some operating experience, maybe you're budgeting to do an even bigger garage upgrade, that sort of thing. So I would also caution you, not so much on the easy bay, but we have had projects where the owner said, well, I want to build walls, and you can do, you can kind of have the homemade version of the easy bay as well, using constructed walls, CMU, drywall studs, whatever method you use. So we had a project where the owner, another consultant, had come in before us and had done an assessment of the facility. And it was not a particularly large shop to begin with. I think there was about a dozen bays in the shop. Anyway, the consultant that had come in before us did not have a lot of CNG experience, and you remember I said, that usually goes one of 2 ways. It's either the kitchen sink or nothing at all. Well, this was the kitchen sink and the entire cabinets and everything else too. So they had proposed to build essentially a bomb shelter around one bay with heavily reinforced walls and blast panels and everything explosion-proof inside, way beyond what the code would require. And actually they were referencing codes that had nothing to do with CNG. They were, basically the kind of codes that you folks might use in your facilities. They were really intended for an industrial gas or refinery type of application. So that was the all-in approach, and their idea was, well, we'll make this one space really safe. And it turned out it was cheaper to do the entire shop, which is what we did. But we did the design for the entire shop, and I would argue that was safer than what they were going to do. And why? Well, a couple of reasons. One, the owner isn't constrained. So the owner can now, they've got access to all those different workstations in their shop, so they don't have to try to do everything in one place where it maybe wasn't designed for that. So that's one thing. The other is, when you have a release of gas, you want the gas to dilute. Volume helps to dilute that gas. If you dump that gas into a big space, yes, it'll travel further, but it'll also be, diluting as it moves out. So dumping it into a bigger space and then exhausting it actually can assist in reducing the amount of time that the gas spends in that 5 to 15% in the case of CNG, or 4 to 76 in the case of hydrogen. So again, it's kind of circling back to some of what we talked about before. The kitchen sink approach may actually work against you, and it would have, I think, in that case. And certainly we did what I would consider to be a better, safer upgrade, and for less money. So, and the owner didn't want to do that in the first place, which is why we got involved. So. Okay, so we talked about defueling. I don't want you to think I'm anti-defueling. I'm just anti-defueling unless you have to. And in most cases, you don't have to. There will be a way of isolating the fuel on the vehicle and making whatever repair is required without defueling. That being said, there is a requirement for defueling. 2 different requirements, one for CNG, one for hydrogen. It shows up in 2 different code sections. The International Fire Code 2308 has requirements in there, and they actually don't call it defueling. They call it, I think it's cylinder depressurization or something like that. They don't specifically call it defueling. And so there are some people that say, well, maybe that's not actually, maybe you're not really required to have defueling. So that's the discussion you can have as an owner and with your AHJ. If you're going to defuel though, there are a number of requirements and you can see them listed here. And for CNG, there's kind of 3 different levels of defueling system that you might invest in. The one on the left and the one in the middle are both atmospheric venting. I think as time goes on, we're probably not going to be allowed to do this because we're dumping natural gas to the environment, and natural gas is much more reactive than carbon dioxide, but it is a greenhouse gas. And so basically, I think in time, we're going to be basically forced into some kind of recapture system. So with the one on the left and the one in the middle, what we would normally do is we would also have a fuel transfer hose. So the first thing you do is you close off all the cylinders on the vehicle that you're trying to defuel, except the tank that you actually have to defuel. And then you find an empty vehicle. And the cylinder transfer hose, or vehicle transfer hose, just allows you to dump the gas from that one cylinder into that empty vehicle. And you do that for 1 or 2 vehicles. Try to get the pressure down as far as you can. Then you go to this, and these units, they just defuel the atmosphere, like I said. Now this one is just essentially a post. It's grounded, it's got a flame arrestor on it, but it's vented right there. This one is sort of the next level of technology. It's tied into an ESD system, so if something were to happen, you can hit an ESD button and the defueling operation stops. It's also got some instrumentation so you can't defuel too fast. Defueling too fast can damage the cylinders on the vehicle if they are Type 4 fully composite cylinders. So that's the next level up. So it's essentially this with some additional safety, and it also vents removable. And then the most expensive version would be this one, and this one does have a recapture or recycle system. So it basically sends the gas back into the compressor suction. And so the good news is you're recapturing the gas. However, you can only do this if you're operating the station at the time, because you're essentially pumping the gas out of the one vehicle and into other vehicles. So that's how it's working. And this defueling operation, it needs to be set up somewhere kind of out of the way, offline, because it takes probably a minimum of 2 hours, maybe 4 hours to defuel these tanks. And you don't want to do it too quickly, as I said, because you can actually damage the tanks. So, okay, so that gives you an idea. So this one is actually where we're kind of pushing our customers at this point, because we think they're going to get forced there anyway. So that was CNG. Pretty much covered this, I think. Again, I said that before, don't consider this to be an alternative to building upgrades. It's not. For hydrogen, it's a little bit different story. We're not so concerned about dumping hydrogen to the environment, by the way. So if we don't have to have a recapture system on a hydrogen defueling system, it's really just a means to safely, controllably allow the gas to vent from the tank up to the atmosphere. So that's all we're trying to accomplish there. There are a number of requirements in the International Fire Code here, and they have a section, and they do call this defueling. So anyway, so this is the hydrogen requirements. They're showing a maximum 1-inch vent pipe, flow cannot exceed 1,000 CFM. That to me is way too fast, because you will be defueling your tanks too fast at that rate. And we throttle the gas coming out of CNG tanks, so we don't defuel too quickly. So I'm not sure where they come up with this, but I would use a 2-inch pipe, but I'd be throttling it to a much lower number than that. So discharge to a safe location, grounded, bonded. All these defueling systems need to be grounded. Early in my career, I was at a station. I was actually doing what Matt was talking about before. I was calibrating a dispenser at a station. And when you're calibrating these dispensers, you typically have a portable tank. And basically, you weigh the tank, and you fill it, and you weigh it again, and the change in weight should agree with whatever the dispenser says you dispensed. it does, great, move on to the next hose. And if it doesn't, you sort of make some adjustments and you do this whole thing again. But the bottom line is you end up venting a bunch of gas out of this tank over the course of calibrating a bunch of hoses. So I was getting sort of impatient, and I had this tank and I had it kind of off to the side. And this was before these codes existed. We didn't ground anything, we didn't have vent stacks. We just, you know, sat it down on the ground and opened the valve, held on. So I'm doing that, it's taking a long time. So I opened up the valve a bit more, and I just kind of adjusted my body weight, and I put my knee down on the ground, and I became the ground. And you'd be surprised how much electricity flowing gas can generate. That static charge went up my arm and down my leg, and I was gimpy for the rest of the day. Some of you may say I'm gimpy. Anyway, but no, that's it. It shocked me. But no, it is surprising, and there have been situations with static discharge where you can actually ignite the gas, and then you have a torch. So that's why everything has to be grounded and bonded. So again, with hydrogen, you're only looking at one of those two options. There's no reason to try to recapture it. So. Make sense? Okay, we're going to talk about cost, and this is maybe the hardest topic that we're going to have, because this is not a real easy thing to put your arms around. And as I said earlier, you know, I get phone calls from people, oh, I want to build a CNG station. Okay, well, what do you want to do? So you can do some quick back of the envelope stuff, and yeah, that's a $3 million station. Whatever. Okay, well, now I have to upgrade my garage. Okay, well, how big is it? Well, it's whatever, 50,000 square feet. So we go through this discussion, but really there's no way of giving a number over the phone. You need to go and do a bunch of engineering, because every facility is different than the next one. So you need to be basically doing some concept level engineering, sizing equipment, and then pricing. And there is a big range. So when we toured our 30 garages, or whatever it was when we were doing this, we asked for cost data from actual projects. Many of them didn't have cost data, and so that was sort of the first problem. But there was also a big range in data. And there's cases, and there's a lot of cases, I think 9 cases in the back of the CNG manual. Some of them will have cost data, and it'll be on the first page of the case that's there. Many of them don't, so just FYI. So the things that affect the cost of the upgrades, and we've talked about some of this, obviously the size of the facility. If you're upgrading more square footage, generally that means it's going to cost more. You know, if you're doing the same thing on all your square footage, the cost goes up. The age and the type of structure that you have will influence it up or down. The climate, and I've got a table on the next page. You know, not surprisingly, facilities in cold climates cost more to upgrade than facilities in warm climates. They require more heating, they tend to be bigger because often you're parking indoors. So there's a number of factors why that's true, but basically cold weather garages require more upgrades, therefore they cost more. The nature of the work performed in the facility. So if it's strictly a parking garage, yesterday, and you guys really missed a good tour, actually 2 days ago, because the tour 2 days ago was in New York State, Western New York's largest beer distributor. We did the classroom part of that with 5 acres of beer on the other side of the wall. So it was very hard to keep people focused. There were 5 acres of beer on the other side of the wall. That particular facility has an all CNG truck fleet for their deliveries, and so their loading bays, and we were there while they were loading it, and you really want to watch where you're standing, because man, they're moving through there. But anyway, the loading bays are all CNG friendly there. But that was a very inexpensive upgrade. They're not doing any maintenance, they're not storing vehicles in there. Those vehicles spend like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever. They're in and they're out, and so there's the risk of a release in there of any consequence is quite small, and it's a very large room. I mean, there's just a lot of headroom, so if there was a release, the gas is going to disperse on its own, and there's not a lot of heating equipment in there. So all in all, a pretty easy upgrade. And again, because of the nature of the work, there wasn't a lot that they had to do. So as I mentioned before, the risk tolerance of the decision makers. So that gets us back to that table, good, better, best. Moving from left to right basically means you have a lower risk tolerance. You don't want to assume as much risk, you want to build in more safety. And that's not a bad thing. So if you're building a brand new facility, I would certainly advocate for making it fuel neutral or fuel versatile, as I said before, so that you can go in with a lot of different fuels. And that has a relatively modest cost. Things like the gas detection system, you can come back and do that later. But the way you configure the electrical, the ventilation, the heating, those things, if you do them right at the outset, then you have a facility that you can use for a lot of different fuels and not have to spend a lot of money later. And if you decide you're going to do CNG later or hydrogen later, you come back in and you put in the appropriate gas detection system and interlock that with your doors and heating, and away you go. You're done. So that's a fairly modest cost on a new facility. But when you're retrofitting, it's a different story. So what we have seen in terms of costs for gas detection systems, something in the $5 to $10 per square foot range installed. So that's equipment plus installation. And that's a pretty big range maybe, but if you have a large facility, the cost of things like control panels kind of gets amortized over more square footage, let's say. Whereas if you have a smaller facility, you maybe still need a control panel and then you need a few detectors. So the cost per square foot is a bit higher. But anyway, and different technologies will also impact that cost. So again, $5 to $10 per square foot installed is not a bad number. After that, we're actually saying 7 to 10 for hydrogen, thinking that we may end up with more detectors on hydrogen. After that, though, when you start talking about the rest of the systems, it gets really hard to put numbers on it. And we did see a big range. So the numbers that we collected ranged from about $5 per square foot, clearly they didn't do much at all, to about $30 per square foot. But that's a bit misleading too, because some people did do different things in one part of the garage than in another. And so that just kind of all gets averaged out over the total square footage. So for example, we had one of the tours that we did, one of the cases that we did, they did a very extensive upgrade in their maintenance shop, but they didn't in their storage area. The storage area, they really just got rid of open flame heaters, and they put gas detection in the exhaust ducts and called it a day. They do intend to come back later and continue to upgrade, but that's what they did at the time. So they had a very low cost on the big square footage and a high cost on the small square footage. So they were in the $80 to $100 range on the small square footage, but overall they were down in that 5 to 30 range when you aggregated it across the facility. So I spoke about this already. Take a look at that. But again, the takeaway from this is, sorry folks, you're in the expensive part of the country anyway, so. Yeah. Okay, so I had mentioned before, we have we collected sort of feedback, advice, whatever, from the various operating personnel and fleet owners that we interviewed during our tours. And I put this together. There's basically, you're going to see it says CNG best practices. Really, we didn't have anything that we collected on the hydrogen side that wasn't already on the CNG side. So, and we tried to sort of use, even though it might be CNG, it's probably still applicable to hydrogen, because the two fuels, from a maintenance facility standpoint, two fuels are handled in much the same way. So I'm not going to go through these blow by blow, but you can take a look through them yourself. And again, if you have any questions, you can contact me after. But keep in mind, and then this goes on for the second page, the SOPs that we're showing there, you know, this is like a one-liner, but your actual SOP document could very well be 2, 3, 4, 6 pages long, where you're going to go through in a lot more detail, step by step, what people have to do in a given circumstance. So that circumstance could be, you know, I've got a vehicle that caught fire in my garage, what do I do? You know, that would be a good thing to have no matter what fuel you're dealing with. But that's the sort of thing, you know, you need to have a detailed, not just a one-liner. You know. So I guess that's it for the best practice part of it. The next thing I'm going to get into is the case studies, but I'm going to jump kind of down to the bottom. We're going to talk about this particular facility because it does cover both CNG and hydrogen. And if you think back to Mark Finicum, that was the gentleman who gave you the welcome this morning. As he said, they got into CNG, I'm not sure how many, 7 years ago?
Yep.
7 years ago. And then the last 2 years, they've also added hydrogen. It was a pretty easy transition for them because they had done the facility upgrades when they went from diesel to CNG. And then really the only upgrade, I think, was the gas detection system to move them towards hydrogen as well. So give me a moment here, and I'm going to jump down into my presentation. Okay, does that look familiar? Like at the airport when you're trying to locate yourself. You are here. Okay, so they did upgrades. Actually, I'm seeing 2015 and 2017. So I think the 2015 was actually the start of their hydrogen upgrade, and maybe they've done it in 2 phases. But prior to 2015, they had already done their CNG upgrades. The total cost came out to, you can see, about $16 per square foot here. And I believe, I was under the impression that that included CNG, but I could be wrong with that. But anyway, these are numbers that he gave me from bids that they had. So just, we have a format that we go through with each of these cases. And we use the word case study somewhat loosely here. We're really trying to present a very picture-rich approach to these facilities. So we'll give you sort of the bullet facts of what they've done, but mostly we just want to show you what it looks like, what people are doing from an equipment standpoint. So we're not thinking you're going to go out and spec equipment based on this, but at least you'll have an idea of what other people have done. And maybe you find a facility that looks like the one you're working on, and you can learn from their experience. So you can see the fuel types in the garage over here. So we have essentially 2 lighter than air fuels, 2 heavier than air fuels. These are primarily 40-foot transit buses, also with cutaway vans and some sedans. This view of the garage is basically when you're coming down the street here. If you look down the hill, you'll be looking at that end of the garage. And they got 2 doors here. They have basically a grill that goes down outside, so they can leave their doors open with no worries of people wandering through the facility. So that's just a security thing. But they can leave their inside doors open during the warm months to give them more natural ventilation through there. So again, there are basically 2 parts to the garage. The maintenance shop, about 11,000 square feet, 6 bays plus a brake repair, plus a chassis wash, plus a paint booth. So really 9 bays total. As you can see, it's a flat roof structure with bar joists. So there's it's similar to the picture that I showed you before. Very good from a ventilation standpoint because you can pull air across the underside of that. Quite unobstructed. So, a relatively easy upgrade. You can see there is a step in the roof here, and why is that? Well, you need more headroom in the maintenance shop because you have to be able to put buses on the lift. So that part of the shop is higher. And again, the 18-inch zone that we talked about, it would apply, the way we apply it, it would apply both in this area as well as in the other area. And when you get out there, that makes sense because the parking garage is huge compared to the maintenance shop. So really, they are almost separate areas even though they're directly connected at the end of the wall. So, and then the parking garage, you can see they stacked their buses here, stacked parking. So those doors that I showed you, that's where the buses roll out in the morning. They open those doors and the buses all leave from there in the morning. 83,000 square feet. So we're just shy of 100,000 square feet here. So their heating system, they have several different types of units, but they are coming off these 3 boilers, and we'll take you in and show you the boiler room. But anyway, they're producing the hot water, and then they have unit heaters throughout the area. You can see here, these are hydronic unit heaters, so there's no open flames, it's just hot water. And then they also have hydronic coils in their roof-mounted makeup air units as well. So they're not using any heat recovery. They have these rooftop centrifugal exhaust fans. Here's where their ducted system, they're blowing warm makeup air in at ceiling level, but you can see they are pointing it down towards us. They also have warm air coming in at the floor here, so a combination of the two here. 4 air changes per hour. They do have some direct vented supplemental exhaust fans, which I believe they actually run in the summer just for cooling as well, just to help move more air through the shop and keep it a little bit cooler. So if they're running out there today, don't panic. It doesn't necessarily mean they've got gas release. And those add the extra 6 air changes. So remember before we were talking about sort of baseline exhaust versus emergency exhaust. Their baseline exhaust system is 4 air changes per hour. That derates the electrical requirement at the ceiling. So that's enough to take care of that. And then they've got supplemental emergency exhaust. Really, technically, they only needed 1 extra air change per hour. They've gone to 6. Again, more air equals more safety in the event of a release. You're going to see this. Actually, I should just skip over this slide. This is Jim's stuff here. But, Jim is going to give us a description of how his system works. But basically, 56-point detector, stop me if I'm wrong here, on a 30-foot grid. And I think that 30-foot grid is not a hard and fast.
Yeah, it's a little bit larger.
Yeah. They are catalytic detectors, and they're set up to monitor both the hydrogen and CNG, and then you've got toxic gases here as well, correct?
Yeah, CO.
Just CO2?
Yeah,
Okay.
just CO.
So I should fix that. Automatic calibration, I don't want to steal the story there, so let's get beyond that. The detection system powers open the overhead doors, starts the emergency exhaust fans, and activates horns and strobes. And the approximate cost was about $5 per square foot. So, and a pretty comprehensive system. In terms of electrical upgrades, they did lower the lighting. That's hard to see out there, but you can see it in your book. They lowered the lighting from 18 inches to 24 inches below the ceiling level, just to get it out of that zone. Although technically they didn't need to do that because they had the 4 air changes per hour. So they were adding some additional safety there. They did add a generator to power the ventilation, gas detection, overhead doors, and the other sort of safety critical loads. So they have a rail up here in one of their bays, and again, that's for purposes of safe cylinder inspection on the roofs of the buses. Both hydrogen and CNG buses have the tankage on the roofs, so you're going to need to get up there for that. And for any of you folks that are dealing with hybrid buses or electric buses, same thing. So you'll need that same kind of system for them. Okay, before I get into this, and I think we're just right on time, is there any questions on this or anything we might have covered earlier in the day? fire hose. A lot of information, TMI. Okay, well, if there's no questions, I want to talk a little bit about the course evaluation and also just about some safety issues for the tour here. So we've given you these course evaluation forms. We would like you to fill out both sides. On the back, optionally, you can provide your name. You do not have to provide your name. It's optional. If there's something you want to discuss in further detail, by all means, make a note of that. Put your name down, put your email or your phone, and basically so I can get a hold of you. And tell me what it is that you have a question about or what issue you want to discuss further. And I'll contact you and we can pursue that offline. But as I said, if you prefer to remain anonymous, that's fine too. No issue. We're trying to, this is still a beta course here. It's our last beta session, and then we'll go full releases in the fall. But frankly, we don't think there'll be big changes. We do intend to send out a new manual to everybody once we get the final manual. And again, I think from a content point of view, there shouldn't be any major changes there. Depending on what you folks tell us in terms of feedback, we're going to try to roll that into our final version. So if you see typos, we certainly want to know about those too. We'll get those fixed. But we'll email you out a PDF version of the final manual once it's available. And that will be late summer, early fall sort of time. So, yeah, feel free to, like I said, we want your feedback, the good, the bad, the ugly, whatever. Let us know how we did and what, if there's something that we should have covered better, then, please give us that feedback. Yeah, good point. So there is a website, safegasgarage.org or safegasgarage.com. That website basically is home to this training program. And it's sort of piggybacking on top of Clean Fuels Ohio's website, so you might see some linkage there as well. But that website will be continuously updated. So as we get towards training sessions in other cities, there'll be more information about those, and you'll have the ability with a link to Eventbrite to register for those. So if any of you have people who weren't able to come today but would be willing to travel to another city to attend, that would be an opportunity. Or maybe you represent an organization that has offices elsewhere, and you want those people to have access as well. So we are going to be hitting 6 more cities, and I'll just try to get through them here. So Richmond, Virginia, Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas City, Kansas. Hey, there's 7 more cities. Tucson, Arizona. We're doing that late November, by the way. Golf clubs. So Tucson, Arizona, Long Beach, California. You can bring your golf clubs there too. Sacramento, Seattle. I think that's Seattle. Seattle in the fall. But anyway, so those are the cities we're going to be hitting. And then next year, the intent is that we'll be sort of rejigging the information to make it online friendly. And we'll be doing some online presentation of the same material. So I do want to say I'm a little disappointed in you guys. We have a whole box of Frisbees over here. And you're making poor Megan take these back to Columbus.
All the way back to Columbus.
So, how many do you want?
Oh,
Okay, come see us. We'll get you fixed up. So a few more things here. So you're going to see a garage today. You're going to see case studies of garages. I wish every garage was the perfect code compliant, fully best practice implementation facility, but that's not the way it works. So what we have done, we've toured a lot of garages, as I said, and we've shortlisted the best garages that we've seen in various fuels that were involved. And they are good garages. And, you know, we're showcasing the best things that the best garages did. But that doesn't mean every garage is perfect. So, you know, if you're looking through our case studies and you see something and you say, well, that's not right, they should have done, you know, X, Y, or Z. Well, that may be true, but again, we're trying to sort of present the best things that they've done. So if you see something that's not 100%, you know, don't worry about it, I guess. That's kind of to be expected. But that being said, you know, these are the ones that we have shortlisted here. They're very well-run garages, and we've been so fortunate to be able to have them participate in this, and in many cases they're also hosting. So the format that we have here, where we do the training at the garage, that's the way we approach this, so that you're close to at least one garage. In some cases, there'll be another garage.
Oh, I've got the wrong.
Got the wrong tune information. Sorry. I'm still thinking beer. Let's try this. So in terms of safety, a couple of things. Do want you to stay with the group. We're going to be walking around. It's a big space. There's going to be buses driving around potentially out there. But we do want you to be safe, so stay with the group. We have a box full of these. These are not giveaways, although I understand why you might want to take one home. And if you really become attached to this, they are for sale. $79 in the gift shop. So, but we would like to have them back because obviously we use them for the next one. Some of them will actually have safety glasses in their pockets, so if that's the case, you will need more, but we also have safety glasses. So there's different sizes. I think it ranges from medium to 2XL. So dig around in the box, find something that fits, and then when we're finished today, so we're going to go look at the gas detection system first. We're going to tour the rest of the garage. We're going to tour the fueling station, and then we're going to take a bus ride. So you get to take a 10-minute ride on a fuel cell bus.
We're coming back here.
And yeah, you can leave your stuff in the room there.
I'll be cleaning up the lunches, so you can just leave your lunch where it's at. I'll clean that up.
Well, thank you very much.